Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're pulling the sources for a really specific financial landscape. We're looking at Stuart, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just general advice about saving money in Florida.
Right. Yeah.
This is really a deep dive into let's say, the particular economic forces that are affecting residents there on the Treasure Coast.
Yeah, it's a unique spot.
Our mission here is basically to give you a shortcut to really understanding Stuart's financial environment. We're pulling out the critical strategies you need to navigate, well, the local economic friction.
And there is friction.
Definitely. Things like the intense housing costs, the very seasonal income swings,
Mm-hmm.
and crucially, how you can maximize those huge structural tax advantages that Florida offers with its zero state income tax.
And that framework, that zero income tax, is
Yeah.
exactly what makes Stuart such a fascinating case study. You've got this really dramatic contrast. On one hand, you're dealing with these very localized pressures that demand, frankly, extreme financial discipline. We're talking about a median income that's actually below the Florida average,
Mm-hmm.
trying desperately to keep pace with housing costs that feel, well, almost out of control for many.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you're in a state with arguably one of the most powerful tax structures in the entire country for individuals.
Okay.
So the real key to financial well-being there is successfully bridging that gap. You have to mitigate the intense local risk while really aggressively leveraging those powerful state benefits.
Okay, let's start right there with that local financial reality check you mentioned.
Mm.
The data points really make it clear why, generic advice just isn't going to cut it here.
Exactly.
The analysis points out Stuart's median household income is currently sitting at $64,409.
Right.
Now, compare that to the overall Florida average, which is $67,917.
So a bit lower.
Yeah, what is it, about $3,500 gap? It
Mhm.
seems kind of modest on paper, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
But when you look at the expense side of the equation, that gap suddenly feels like a serious pressure point.
Oh, it creates tremendous pressure because the cost of living, and it's driven almost entirely by real estate in that area.
Mm.
It's accelerating so much faster than wages. The data we looked at suggests that over the last decade, Stuart and Martin County have seen really rapid population growth, something like a 15.2% increase.
Wow, okay.
And that influx of new residents, you combine that with low housing inventory. It's driven housing costs up by a staggering 18% annually.
18% a year.
Annually. Think about that for a second. You've got below average income facing double-digit annual increases in what is, for most people, their single largest expense category.
So that classic financial rule of thumb, allocate no more than 30% of your income toward housing.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically impossible for a large chunk of the population there, isn't it?
Absolutely impossible. I mean, the rule is effectively shattered for many residents. When housing is eating up 40%, maybe even 50% of your take-home pay, it just completely eliminates your capacity to save adequately for retirement or build that emergency fund we always talk about or, aggressively pay down debt. It forces you into immediate, specialized planning just to maintain basic stability. That's the environment we're really talking about.
And that instability, it's compounded by the second major local risk you touched on, income volatility. Stuart's economy is, it's heavily skewed, isn't it, towards tourism, recreation, the marine industry.
That's right. And that heavy concentration in tourism creates this distinct seasonal instability that you absolutely have to anticipate. You can't ignore it.
Okay.
The analysis shows that service industry workers, the people staffing the restaurants, the hotels, the local shops, they can face really significant income drops, sometimes 20%, even 30% during those slower summer months once the main tourist rush heads back north.
So you just can't budget for the whole year based on what you earn in February or March.
You absolutely cannot. Doing that is a recipe for disaster come July or August. And this is where the first really critical mitigation strategy comes into play. Income smoothing.
Okay, income smoothing. Let's unpack that.
Sure.
For someone listening, maybe they work on a charter boat or in a seasonal restaurant.
Yeah.
How does this work in practice? What do they actually do?
Okay, good question. Let's use that charter boat example. A captain or a deckhand, they might earn, say, 25% to 30% more from wages, and especially tips between, let's say, November and May compared to June through October.
Right, the high season versus the low season.
Exactly. So income smoothing means they first calculate that expected drop, that 30% reduction. Then during those peak earning months, they automatically, and the automatically part is key, they set aside a specific amount, maybe 25% of their monthly income, into a totally separate, dedicated savings account.
Okay, separate account just for this.
Just for this. Its only purpose is to act as a bridge. It accumulates money during the good times, and then it releases funds back into their regular checking account during the downturn, during the summer slump. What you're doing is essentially creating a manufactured level paycheck throughout the entire year.
Oh, okay.
It removes that anxiety and the financial instability that comes with that summer dip.
So it's almost like building your own personal insurance policy against those local economic cycles.
That's a great way to put it. Self-insurance.
But okay, beyond just saving more effectively, there's also a proactive path mentioned, right? A way to increase income stability that's right there in Stuart's backyard. Something about the marine industry itself.
Precisely. While the general service industry wages can be quite volatile, as we've said, the source material points out that the more highly skilled technical jobs within the marine sector,
Like what specifically?
things like certified boat mechanics, high-end yacht detailing specialists, marine electronics technicians, specialized fiberglass repair, those kinds of roles, they pay significantly better. On average, about 15% above the general service sector wages.
Okay, 15% is a noticeable jump.
It is. So for a motivated Stuart resident who's maybe feeling that seasonal pinch, acquiring a certification in a specific marine trade isn't just, changing jobs. It's an immediate, very practical wealth-building strategy.
Or so.
Well, it diversifies their income source locally. It makes them less reliant on just the tourist flow. And crucially, it often provides more stable year-round work because it's tied to the long-term needs of the region's huge boat ownership community. Those boats need maintenance year-round, not just during tourist season.
Got it. Okay, moving on to what you call the non-negotiables. We have to talk about housing costs that go beyond just the mortgage or the rent payment, specifically property taxes and insurance.
Yes, and this is an area where even residents who are benefiting massively from Florida's zero state income tax still have to pay a significant local premium. Martin County property taxes, the analysis shows, average about 0.84% of the home's assessed value.
Okay, 0.84%. What does that look like in real dollars?
Well, if you own, say, a $500,000 home, which is becoming more common there, that requires budgeting an estimated $4,200 annually, just for property tax.
Wow, $4,000. That's a pretty significant chunk of change that can absolutely derail your budget if you're not ready for it.
Exactly.
If that bill comes due in, say, November or December, and you haven't been setting money aside all year, you're suddenly scrambling.
You're absolutely scrambling, or worse, putting it on a credit card. So the necessary defense mechanism here is establishing what we call separate savings disciplines.
Okay.
You shouldn't even try to absorb that $4,200 property tax bill or maybe a high annual homeowner's insurance premium out of just one or two regular paychecks. It's too lumpy. You need dedicated, separate savings accounts, almost like setting up your own little escrow account, where you automatically deposit 1/12 of those big annual expenses every single month. This prevents those predictable yet very large costs from blowing up your monthly budget and causing a crisis.
Makes sense. And on insurance, there's a really specific warning in the sources, isn't there, about flood damage?
A very strong warning, yes. Given Stuart's location near the coast and the rivers, standard homeowners insurance policies explicitly exclude flood damage. This is critical.
So if you get water damage from a hurricane surge or heavy rains, your normal policy won't cover it.
Correct. You need a separate flood insurance policy. And the data provided by FEMA's flood maps is pretty striking. It suggests about 23% of properties in Stuart are in designated flood zones.
Nearly a quarter of all homes.
Yes. So for almost a quarter of homeowners there, securing separate, often mandatory if you have a mortgage, flood coverage isn't just a good idea. It's an essential structural financial defense. Ignoring this is, frankly, risking catastrophic financial ruin.
Okay, so before we dive into the growth strategies, let's just set the foundation firmly. Based on the sources, what are those three foundational pillars, the absolute, non-negotiable financial building blocks that have to be solidly in place before a Stuart resident even starts thinking about aggressive investment strategies?
Yeah, the sources are very consistent on this. Three things. First, a robust emergency fund. And given that seasonal income volatility we discussed, 6 months of essential living expenses is really the absolute minimum safety net you should aim for. Not 3 months, 6.
6 months.
Second, a debt elimination strategy. And this needs to ruthlessly target high-interest consumer debt. We're talking specifically about credit cards. If you're carrying balances at 20%, 25% interest, no investment strategy on earth is going to consistently outrun that kind of financial drag. It has to go.
Priority number one.
Absolutely. And third, maximizing your 401k contributions, at the very least up to the point where you capture the full employer match. If your employer offers a match, that's literally free money. It's the gateway to tax-advantaged wealth building. You cannot leave that on the table.
So, emergency fund, high-interest debt, 401k match.
If those three aren't solid, rock solid, then honestly, the rest of the financial plan, no matter how sophisticated, is basically built on sand. It won't hold up under pressure.
Okay, that's a very clear foundation. Now let's transition into building on that foundation. Let's unpack the investment strategy itself. Given that structural risk we keep mentioning, the seasonal income instability, a portfolio that's 100% aggressive growth feels, well, just potentially too risky, right?
It could be, yeah.
But at the same time, a 100% conservative portfolio probably isn't going to keep pace with that scary 18% annual housing cost inflation we talked about earlier.
Definitely not. You'll fall behind.
So how do you marry that need for aggressive growth with the need for immediate stability? What kind of allocation does the research recommend for, say, working-age residents in Stuart?
The sources recommend a very deliberate, quite specialized diversification model. It's essentially a 70% allocation to growth-oriented investments, combined with a 30% allocation to more conservative income-generating assets.
70-30.
70-30. And that specific split is designed precisely to combat that local economic fluctuation, that seasonality.
Okay, but even that 70% in growth still sounds pretty aggressive, especially when you layer on that seasonal income risk. What happens if that growth portfolio takes a big hit, a recession, a market crash, right when someone's income drops during the summer slump? Are there specific risk mitigation steps mentioned beyond just holding that 30%?
That's an excellent point, and it really highlights why the quality and the purpose of that 30% conservative slice matter so much.
Okay.
That 30% isn't just supposed to be cash sitting idle under the mattress. It needs to be actively managed to generate reliable income, steady income.
Ah, okay.
This provides necessary liquidity, sure, but it also acts as a sort of countercyclical buffer. The research emphasizes that the growth portion, that 70%, should be allocated to investments you plan to hold for the long term. Think 10, 20, 30 years. Assets you absolutely do not need to touch or sell during a market downturn or a slow summer season.
Right. You ride out the volatility.
Exactly. The 30% portion is your immediate operational stability pool. By focusing on assets that generate steady monthly dividends or interest within that 30%, you ensure that your capital is actively contributing to your financial stability, even when your earned income from your job might be temporarily lower.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some tangible examples? What specific assets or funds are mentioned in the sources that fit this specialized profile? Give us some concrete, actionable ideas.
Sure. For that steady 30% income-focused portion, the recommendation leans towards real estate investment trusts, or REITs. Specifically, REITs that focus on Florida commercial and residential properties.
Okay, REITs. For listeners who might not be familiar, can you quickly explain what those are and why they fit this particular need?
Absolutely. A REIT essentially lets you own a small piece of large-scale, income-producing real estate. Think shopping malls, large apartment complexes, office buildings, data centers, properties you couldn't possibly buy on your own.
Right.
And the key thing is, by law, REITs are required to pay out at least 90% of their taxable income to shareholders in the form of dividends.
Ah, hence the income focus.
Exactly. This structure results in those reliable, often monthly dividend payments. According to NARE, that's the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts, REIT dividends typically average around 4.2% annually. So investing in Florida-focused REITs allows you to maintain exposure to the state's population growth and economic activity while simultaneously providing that consistent cash flow buffer needed to help offset those seasonal income dips.
Okay, REITs for the 30% stability bucket. What about the other side, the aggressive 70% growth section? What kinds of assets are recommended there to try and keep pace with or even outpace those frightening housing cost increases?
Yeah, for the 70%, you really need broad market exposure that captures global growth, but also specifically leans into high-performance sectors to help overcome any local economic stagnation or that housing cost pressure.
Makes sense.
The sources specifically point towards things like broad-based technology sector ETFs. They use the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, ticker VTI, as a prime example.
VTI. Right.
Now, while VTI offers very broad exposure to the entire U.S. stock market, its composition includes significant weightings in high-growth U.S. technology companies and other innovative firms. These types of vehicles have historically delivered pretty robust average returns. The data suggests around 12.8% annually over the past decade.
That's strong performance.
It is, which makes them potentially ideal core holdings for younger or working age residents who, crucially, have a high tolerance for short-term market volatility, but absolutely need that long-term compounding power to build substantial wealth in such a high-cost area like Stuart.
Okay, now here's where, for me at least, it gets really interesting. Florida's lack of a state income tax.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes the entire financial playbook, doesn't it? Especially when it comes to investment returns. This feels like the spot where Stuart residents can genuinely leapfrog their peers in high-tax states.
Oh, it is absolutely transformational, and it affects pretty much every dollar you earn from your investments outside of retirement accounts to qualified dividends, long-term capital gains, interest income. None of it is subject to any state income tax in Florida. Zero.
Huge.
And the most powerful strategy highlighted in the sources leveraging this is what's called the Roth conversion advantage.
Okay, Roth conversions. Explain that.
When you convert money from a traditional pre-tax retirement account, like a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, into a Roth IRA, you have to pay federal income tax on that converted amount in the year you do the conversion. That's the trade-off.
Right. You pay the tax now instead of later.
Exactly. But here's the game changer for Florida residents. You pay zero state income tax on that conversion amount.
Okay. Give us a concrete comparison. Put some dollars on that to show the impact.
Let's do that. Imagine a Stuart resident and, say, a peer living in California. Both decide they want to convert $100,000 from a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA this year.
Okay. Same amount, different states.
Right. The Florida resident pays their federal income tax on the $100K, but $0 in state tax. The California resident, they also pay federal tax, but then they could face state income taxes of up to 13.3% on that same $100,000 conversion.
13.3%.
Yes, that's an immediate extra tax bill of $13,300 that the Stuart resident completely sidesteps just by virtue of living in Florida. And it gets better. Once that $100,000 is inside the Roth IRA, all the future growth, and perhaps more importantly, all the future withdrawals in retirement are completely tax-free, federally and at the state level. It's an incredibly powerful, almost unbeatable incentive to strategically move money into Roth accounts over time if you're a Florida resident.
That completely shifts the math, doesn't it? It makes paying that federal tax up front seem much more appealing.
Much more appealing, especially if you believe your tax rate might be higher in the future, or if you just value that tax certainty in retirement.
Okay, what about fixed income? Things like bonds. If I'm a Florida resident, should I just automatically buy Florida municipal bonds because they're tax-free?
Well, that's the conventional wisdom, right? Buy bonds issued in your own state for state tax exemption. But Florida's zero tax status actually allows for a pretty savvy strategy reversal.
A reversal? How?
Normally, municipal bonds are only free from state income tax in the state where they were issued. So a New York bond is state tax-free for a New Yorker, but not necessarily for someone in Georgia? But since Florida has no state income tax anyway, its residents aren't limited to just Florida bonds to get that state tax benefit because there is no state tax benefit needed. They can actually shop around and purchase municipal bonds issued by other states.
Interesting. Why would they do that?
Because, as the analysis points out, municipal bonds from states with high income taxes, think New York, California, Massachusetts, often have to offer a slightly higher interest rate, a higher yield, to attract their local buyers who are facing those steep state taxes.
They have to compensate the locals for the state tax hit.
Precisely. So a Florida resident can potentially buy those higher yielding out-of-state municipal bonds, like, say, for example, a New York muni bond that's currently offering a 3.8% tax-free yield and potentially achieve a better after-tax return than they might get from a comparable U.S. Treasury bond. Or maybe even a Florida municipal bond, which might offer a slightly lower yield because Florida investors don't need that state tax break factored in.
So they're effectively arbitraging other states' tax policies?
In a way, yes. It's a specialized opportunity that's really only available to residents of zero income tax states like Florida. You get federal tax exemption, and there's no state tax to worry about regardless of where the bond comes from.
Fascinating. Okay, so when it comes to prioritizing where savings should go, how should a Stuart resident stack their contributions? What's the pecking order?
The hierarchy laid out is pretty straightforward and logical. First, absolutely first, contribute enough to your 401k to get the full employer match. Always, always capture that free money. Don't leave it on the table.
Rule number one.
Rule number one. Second, especially for younger investors or anyone who anticipates being in a higher tax bracket later in life, the priority should shift to funding Roth accounts. That means a Roth IRA if you're eligible, or contributing to a Roth 401k option if your employer offers one.
Lock in that future tax freedom now.
Exactly. Pay the federal tax now at potentially lower rates and enjoy tax-free growth and withdrawals later, completely free from state taxes too.
Okay, beyond the 401k match or the Roth options, what other tax-advantaged accounts should Florida residents really be looking to maximize before they start putting money into just regular taxable brokerage accounts?
There's one account that gets special emphasis, and rightly so, because its benefits are amplified in a no-income tax state like Florida. We need to talk about the health savings account, the HSA.
Ah, the HSA.
The HSA provides what the sources call the true triple threat for tax-advantaged savings.
Triple threat. What are the three benefits?
Okay, first, the money you contribute goes in pre-tax, directly reducing your current federal income tax liability, so immediate tax savings.
Yeah.
Second, the money inside the HSA grows tax-deferred over time, just like an IRA or 401k.
Yep.
And third, if you withdraw the money for qualified medical expenses now or any time in the future, even decades later, those withdrawals are completely tax-free, federal and state.
Pre-tax in, tax-deferred growth, tax-free out for medical. That's powerful.
Extremely powerful. But the real kicker, especially for long-term planning and particularly relevant in Florida, is its role after age 65.
What happens then?
After you turn 65, the HSA essentially becomes like a second traditional IRA. You can withdraw funds for any reason, not just medical expenses. If you use it for non-medical reason, the withdrawals are taxed, but only at ordinary federal income rates.
Ah, but still no state income tax.
Still zero state income tax on those withdrawals in Florida. This makes it an incredibly flexible and powerful retirement savings tool on top of its healthcare benefits. The sources strongly emphasize that for anyone eligible, meaning you have a qualifying high-deductible health insurance plan, maximizing your HSA contribution every year up to the 2024 limit of $4,150 for individuals, more for families, is absolutely essential before moving on to taxable accounts.
Got it. And just to really solidify the basic 401k benefit for that working resident in Stuart, they can contribute that full federal limit, what is it, $23,000 for 2024 if you're under 50?
$23,000, correct, plus catch-up contributions if you're 50 or older.
Right. So they can contribute that full amount, knowing that every dollar they defer avoids federal tax today. And crucially, when they eventually take that money out in retirement, perhaps decades from now, the state of Florida will take exactly zero tax from it. That long-term certainty must be a huge incentive to push those contribution limits as high as possible.
It is the core engine of tax-efficient wealth building in Florida. Absolutely. By structuring their investment allocations smartly to handle that local risk, remember the 70-30 split, and then maximizing these incredibly powerful tax-advantaged retirement vehicles like the 401k, Roth accounts, and the HSA to fully leverage that state tax freedom. That's how the Stuart resident can turn those local economic challenges we started with into manageable risks, while ensuring they have the best possible shot at exponential tax-efficient growth over the long haul.
Okay, let's pivot now and talk about actually being retired in Stuart. What does all this, particularly the zero state income tax, mean for the actual spendable income of a retiree living there? Can we quantify the savings compared to someone retiring in, say, a high-tax state?
We can, and the financial relief is enormous. It's one of the biggest draws for retirees to Florida. For a retiree living in Florida, that zero state income tax means that basically every major source of retirement income escapes state-level taxation entirely.
What sources are we talking about?
We're talking Social Security benefits, no state tax on those. Withdrawals from traditional 401k and traditional IRA plans, zero state tax. Payments from traditional pension plans, if you're lucky enough to have one zero state tax.
Wow, that covers almost everything.
It covers the vast majority of typical retirement income streams. Now contrast that with a retiree moving from or staying in a high-tax environment. Let's take New York again. New York taxes most pension income above a certain threshold and can tax higher income Social Security benefits.
Okay.
So an individual retiree in New York, maybe earning $80,000 a year in combined retirement income, could easily be facing state income tax bills of $5,000, $6,000, even $7,000 every single year.
Just in state taxes.
Just in state taxes. The Florida resident with the exact same $80,000 income, they retain 100% of that money, avoiding that state tax hit completely.
Over a 20-year retirement, that's well over 6 figures in savings.
Easily 6 figures. directly attributable simply to the state's tax structure. It's a massive difference in lifestyle and financial security during retirement.
And this really underscores why the strategic timing of those Roth conversions we talked about is so critical, right?
Absolutely critical. A smart pre-retiree in Florida, maybe someone planning ahead in their 50s or early 60s, might strategically time those Roth conversions during years when their income is temporarily lower.
Like maybe after they stop working, but before they start taking Social Security.
Yeah.
Exactly that window. Perhaps the period between retiring at, say, 62 and delaying Social Security until age 70, their income might be lower then, meaning the federal tax impact of the conversion is minimized. Meanwhile, they're steadily moving money into that Roth bucket, building up a massive pool of wealth that will be completely tax-free federally and, of course, state tax-free during their later, potentially higher spending retirement years. It's proactive tax planning at its finest.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to another huge Florida advantage, especially for homeowners, the homestead exemption. It's almost famous, right? But what are the true quantifiable estate planning and asset protection advantages that a Martin County resident really needs to understand deeply?
Yeah, the homestead exemption is incredibly powerful, and it provides two massive, very distinct financial shields for Florida residents.
Two shields. Okay, what's the first one?
The first is pure asset protection. Florida's Constitution provides homeowners with protection for an unlimited amount of equity in their primary residence against claims from most types of creditors.
Unlimited equity. So if my house is worth $2 million and fully paid off, it's protected.
If it's your designated homestead, yes. If you get sued, perhaps due to a business debt, a major accident, even large medical bills that go to collections, your primary residence, your homestead, is generally protected. Creditors usually cannot force the sale of your home to satisfy those debts. This level of protection is almost unique in the United States and provides an incredible amount of security for your most valuable physical asset.
That is remarkable. Okay, what's the second shield?
The second major benefit is the property tax savings component. This comes through what's known as the Save Our Homes cap.
Save our homes. Okay.
Remember that scary 18% average annual increase in housing costs we discussed earlier?
Vividly.
Well, the Save Our Homes provision puts a cap on how much the assessed value of your homestead property can increase each year for tax purposes. The increase is limited to the lesser of either 3% or the annual change in the Consumer Price Index, CPI, basically the rate of inflation.
So even if the market value of my home skyrockets by 18%, my property tax assessment can only go up by, say, 3% or less.
Exactly. This means that long-term homeowners in Stuart, people who established their homestead years ago when property values were much lower, are often paying property taxes based on an assessed value that is just a fraction of their home's current market value. It provides tremendous long-term predictability and protection against being taxed out of your own home due to rapidly rising property values.
The Save Our Homes cap definitely provides stability for long-term residents, but it also seems to highlight a potential tension, doesn't it? Recent buyers coming into this market, facing those 18% annual increases, are essentially paying vastly higher effective property tax rates than their neighbors who bought 20 years ago.
Oh, it is absolutely a major driver of local discussion, sometimes controversy, and it contributes to disparities. But from the perspective of that long-term established resident, it is an unparalleled financial protection mechanism against runaway property tax increases.
And the sources also mentioned something about portability for married couples in relation to estate taxes.
Yes, that's more of a federal estate tax concept, but it interacts importantly with Florida planning. It's called portability. This allows a surviving spouse to essentially inherit or use any unused portion of the deceased spouse's federal estate tax exemption.
Okay, what's the exemption amount now? It's quite high, isn't it?
It's very high currently. For 2024, it's $13.61 million per person. So a married couple effectively has over $27 million shielded from federal estate taxes. Portability allows the surviving spouse to capture the unused portion of the first spouse's exemption, but it requires filing an estate tax return upon the first death to properly elect portability. It's a crucial step for wealthier couples to ensure that even very large estates can pass free of federal estate tax.
Got it. And getting back to the homestead exemption itself, the requirements are pretty rigorous, aren't they? It's not just about owning a home in Florida.
Correct. It's not automatic. You have to affirmatively apply for it. And more importantly, you must demonstrate that Florida is unequivocally your legal primary domicile, your permanent home.
How do you demonstrate that?
It involves several concrete steps: converting your driver's license to Florida, registering to vote in Florida, filing for the exemption with the county property appraiser, and critically, physically, spending more than 6 months and 1 day of the calendar year in the state. You need to build a clear record showing Florida is your center of gravity.
And if you fail to maintain those ties, if you start spending more time up north, for instance,
You risk losing the homestead status and all those powerful asset protection and property tax benefits that come with it. The state and counties do look closely at residency claims.
okay, that makes sense. Now, since the homestead exemption only protects the primary residence, what happens with other assets? What needs to be done to protect things like, say, a vacation condo up in the mountains or a rental property down in Fort Lauderdale, or even just a large taxable brokerage account? Those aren't covered by homestead, right?
Correct. Homestead protection is incredibly powerful, but it's surgically limited to that one designated primary residence. Everything else is potentially exposed. And this is where trust structures move from being merely helpful to being essentially essential for comprehensive planning in Florida.
Okay, trusts, what kind are we talking about?
Well, we typically look at revocable living trusts first. These are very flexible accounts of you retain control over the assets during your lifetime, and you can change the trust terms. They were almost necessary for holding assets like out-of-state vacation properties or large investment accounts.
Why are they necessary? What do they achieve?
They serve two primary purposes. First, assets held in a revocable trust avoid the often costly, time-consuming, and very public process of probate court when the owner passes away. The trust dictates distribution privately. Second, they can provide for seamless management of assets if the owner becomes incapacitated.
Okay, probate avoidance and incapacity planning. What about other types of trusts?
Then you have irrevocable trusts. As the name implies, these are much more rigid. When you put assets into an irrevocable trust, you generally surrender control and ownership of those assets to the trust itself.
That sounds like a big step. Why would someone do that?
Primarily for two reasons. Superior asset protection from future creditors, since you no longer technically own the assets, and most critically in the Florida context, irrevocable trusts are the specialized tool needed for advanced planning related to qualifying for long-term care benefits, particularly Medicaid.
Okay, this brings us to what seems like the most fascinating and frankly maybe the most disturbing juxtaposition in Florida financial planning. You have this incredibly generous, unlimited asset protection for your primary home through homestead.
Right.
Yet, as you just mentioned, long-term care, LTC planning, remains absolutely imperative because of the state's very strict Medicaid rules for nursing home assistance.
This is the core conflict that really dictates so much advanced planning for long-term Florida residents. It's crucial to understand. Despite Florida's amazing homestead protection for your house, the state's Medicaid program, which is the primary payer for long-term nursing home care for most people once private funds run out, has an unbelievably strict asset limit. For an individual seeking Medicaid assistance for long-term care, they can generally only have $2,000 in countable assets to their name.
$2,000.
Sure.
So let me get this straight. On the one hand, I could have a $5 million mansion on the water, fully protected by homestead, shielded from almost any creditor.
Correct.
But on the other hand, if I need long-term nursing home care, which can cost $10,000 a month or more, and I want Medicaid to help pay for it, I have to be virtually destitute. I have to liquidate almost all my other savings, investments, everything, down to that $2,000 threshold.
Precisely. That is the stark reality. The house might be safe, but the life savings needed to pay for care are completely exposed under the Medicaid rules unless planned for far in advance. It creates this incredible tension that requires years, often decades, of strategic forethought.
So you can't just wait until you need care.
Absolutely not. If you wait until you're 80 years old and have a sudden health crisis requiring immediate nursing home placement, it's almost certainly too late to protect those non-homestead assets. To effectively plan for Medicaid eligibility while preserving assets for, say, a healthy spouse or heirs, you generally must implement advanced LTC planning using those specialized irrevocable trusts we mentioned, and you have to do it at least 5 years before you apply for Medicaid benefits.
The 5-year look-back period.
Exactly. Medicaid looks back 5 years from the date of application to see if any assets were transferred or given away for less than fair market value. If they find improper transfers within that window, they impose a penalty period, delaying eligibility for benefits.
Wow. The complexity here sounds immense.
It is. The rules surrounding these specialized Medicaid planning trusts, the definitions of countable versus non-countable assets, the spousal protection rules, they are incredibly complex and subject to frequent changes in both federal and state regulations. This is absolutely not a do-it-yourself project. It demands guidance from experienced elder law attorneys and financial advisors who specialize in this specific area.
So that tension between the unlimited protection for property wealth via homestead and the near-zero asset limit for accessing essential long-term care support via Medicaid, that's really the single greatest planning challenge driving strategy for many long-term Florida residents, isn't it?
It truly is. Navigating that dichotomy successfully is paramount for long-term financial security in the state.
Okay, let's tie all this incredibly specialized knowledge back to the role of the financial professional. Given the complexities, we've just spent the last, 20 minutes discussing the seasonal income, the very specific state tax advantages, that Medicaid-Homestead conflict. Why can't a Stuart resident just use one of the big national financial firms, or maybe even just a purely digital robo-advisor based somewhere else, like New York or Silicon Valley?
Because those national firms and robo-advisors almost by definition miss the critical ground-level economic nuances and opportunities that are unique to Stewart and Martin County. Those nuances are what can generate local wealth and provide true stability.
What kind of nuances are we talking about?
A local advisor, someone based right there in Martin County,
Right.
understands the local development pipelines. They know, for instance, the specific economic impact of upcoming St. Lucie River dredging projects on marine-related businesses. They understand the local regulatory environment, how fast permits are likely to be approved for new commercial real estate, which directly affects the viability of those local REIT investments we discussed. They know exactly where the demand is for those higher-paying, specialized marine industry jobs we talked about, and which specific local certifications are most valuable right now. That kind of hyper-local opportunity awareness, which changes pretty rapidly, is simply inaccessible to a remote advisor looking at broad national data or an algorithm.
So the local advisor isn't just looking at the performance of the S&P 500 index. They're potentially looking at the status of permits and projects along the St. Lucie River corridor.
That's the critical distinction. They connect the necessary broad national investment strategy with the specific, actionable, local economic reality. They also likely have a much better pulse on local housing market fluctuations that are happening on a micro scale, maybe knowing which specific neighborhoods might be seeing unexpected short-term appreciation due to, say, a new school rezoning or a planned infrastructure project. A robo-advisor algorithm isn't going to detect that nuance.
Right.
And importantly, we have to re-emphasize the advisor selection model here. The research consistently, strongly stresses the advantage of working with fee-only financial advisors, particularly in a complex situation like Stewart's.
Fee-only versus commission-based.
Exactly. A fee-only advisor is compensated solely by a transparent flat rate, an hourly fee, or a percentage based on the assets they manage for you. Their financial incentive is directly aligned with growing your net worth over the long term. A commission-based broker, on the other hand, is often incentivized primarily to sell you specific financial products, mutual funds, annuities, insurance that pay them a commission, regardless of whether that product is truly the absolute best, lowest cost fit for your unique, complex Stewart situation. The potential for conflict of interest is much higher.
Got it. Fee only is key. Now, finally, how does that local expertise directly tie back into maximizing the asset protection strategies we discussed?
It connects directly back to that specialized legal and practical knowledge. Local advisors, especially those working closely with local elder law and estate planning attorneys, are intimately familiar with the specific Florida statutory exemptions beyond just homestead. They understand how to properly title assets and structure investment accounts, not just fancy trust accounts, but even standard brokerage accounts in ways that can provide additional layers of shielding from potential creditors, often leveraging nuances of Florida case law that a remote advisor or even a generalist Florida advisor might overlook.
Interesting. So account titling itself can make a difference.
It can make a significant difference. And crucially, that local expertise helps ensure that achieving this legal protection doesn't inadvertently compromise the resident's need for liquidity. In an economy like Stewart's, which can be opportunity-rich but also highly localized, maybe a sudden chance for a prime real estate deal comes up, or a unique marine industry investment opportunity requires quick capital. The financial plan has to strike a careful balance. It needs to provide maximum legal protection for assets while still maintaining the operational flexibility to keep capital readily accessible for rapid action when those local opportunities arise. It's a very specialized balance of playing defense and offense simultaneously.
Okay, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive.
Yeah.
It feels like we've shown that achieving financial success in Stuart really is a meticulous balancing act.
It absolutely is.
We started with that immense local friction, the seasonal income instability, the really aggressive housing inflation, and We worked our way through to the powerful state-level tools that are available to counter those pressures. Things like that aggressive but carefully buffered investment diversification, the 70-30 split,
Right.
the truly transformative power of strategic Roth conversions, potentially saving thousands upon thousands in state taxes over a lifetime, and of course the immense security blanket offered by the Florida homestead exemption.
Ultimately, what the sources make clear is that a Stuart resident's financial strategy has to be hyper-localized. It needs to be highly disciplined. It requires proactive planning, especially things like that income smoothing technique and the long-term care strategies we discussed, to actively manage the inherent instability while simultaneously aggressively leveraging Florida's unique tax efficiencies. And honestly, given the complexity, professional guidance really becomes essential to transform these interwoven, highly complex decisions, everything from trust structuring to Roth conversion timing to choosing the right REITs into clear, executable action plans that maximize your chances of building wealth in what is undeniably a uniquely challenging yet potentially rewarding environment.
And as we close out this deep dive, here is a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to perhaps mull over. We've established the powerful and almost contradictory nature of Florida law when it comes to assets. On one hand, the homestead exemption offers virtually unlimited protection for home equity, shielding potentially millions in generational wealth from creditors. Incredible protection for property.
Right.
Yet, on the other hand, the Florida Medicaid asset limit for long-term care assistance is a mere $2,000 for individuals, a threshold essentially designed for poverty, requiring near destitution to qualify for critical support. So the thought is this: how might these two incredibly distinct protections, one promoting vast wealth preservation and property, the other demanding near poverty for central care access, how might that dichotomy influence a savvy Stuart resident's strategic movement of assets, their use of trusts, and their overall financial planning, perhaps decades before they ever reach retirement age? Knowing that their house is a fortress, but almost all their other liquid wealth is potentially vulnerable if long-term care is needed. Think about that inherent tension and the profound planning imperative it creates long before a crisis hits. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.